She tasted the Vampire King's blood completely by accident. One moment she was clearing wine glasses from the high table. The next, she was on her knees. The world spinning into colors she had no names for, whispering a secret that made the most powerful creature in the realm kneel before her. But that came later. First came the cut. Mira had worked in the Obsidian Palace for exactly 47 days, long enough to know 3 things. Keep your head down, never look the nobility in the eye, and absolutely never, under any circumstances, touch King Theron Nightshade. The third rule existed for excellent reasons. Theron Nightshade wasn't just any vampire king. He was the Vampire King, the one who'd united the fractured bloodline clans 3 centuries ago, who'd negotiated the peace treaty with the human territories, whose very presence could silence a room full of immortals mid-argument. He sat at the head of every council meeting like a statue carved from midnight, his silver eyes missing nothing, his expression revealing less. Mira had seen him only from a distance, a figure in black armor even during peacetime, always alone even when surrounded by hundreds. Tonight's banquet celebrated the autumn equinox, and the great hall glittered with enough candlelight to hurt mortal eyes. Vampires didn't need the light, of course, but they enjoyed the aesthetic. The flames cast dancing shadows across marble columns and turned the nobles' jewels into tiny, captured stars. Mira moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, refilling goblets, clearing plates, existing in the background the way good servants should. She'd almost made it through the entire evening without incident. Almost. Lord Castellan, 3 goblets deep into expensive blood wine, gestured too expansively while telling some centuries-old war story. His ring, a monstrosity of sharp silver edges, caught Mira's wrist as she reached past him. The cut was shallow but immediate, a thin line of red blooming across her skin. She jerked back instinctively, and her elbow connected with the crystal decanter on the serving table behind her. Time slowed. The decanter tipped, spilling its contents in a crimson arc. Mira watched, horrified, as the king's private reserve, the blood wine reserved exclusively for Theron Nightshade, splashed across the white marble floor. 3 drops hit her lips. That's all it was. 3 tiny drops of the king's personal vintage, touching her mouth for less than a heartbeat before she could wipe them away. But 3 drops were enough. The world exploded into sensation. Mira's knees hit the floor, but she barely felt the impact. Her vision fractured into 1,000 colors that shouldn't exist, each one singing a different note. She tasted emotions like flavors, complex and overwhelming. Loneliness, like bitter ash. Duty, like cold iron. And underneath it all, buried so deep she had to reach for it, a desperate aching need to be known, truly known, by someone who saw past the crown and the power and the carefully constructed walls. The visions came next, rapid fire and devastating. A small boy watching his father die, trying not to cry because king's sons don't weep. A young man standing over a battlefield, knowing every death was his responsibility. A king sitting alone in his chambers, removing his crown with hands that trembled, allowing himself exactly 5 minutes of weakness before donning the mask again. And the secret. The one he'd never told anyone. The truth he carried like a stone in his chest. Mira gasped, the visions releasing her as suddenly as they'd seized her. The great hall swam back into focus. Every conversation had stopped. Every eye was on her, the clumsy human servant on her knees, the king's spilled wine pooling around her like an accusation, and Theron Nightshade was standing. Mira had never seen him stand so quickly. One moment seated, the next towering over the high table, his silver eyes locked on her with an intensity that should have turned her to stone. He moved through the crowd, and nobles parted before him like water. Each step was deliberate, predatory, completely silent. Mira couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The blood-tasting gift had been her secret since childhood, the strange ability that made her different, that she'd hidden from everyone. She'd learned early that people feared those who could taste truth in blood, who could read emotions and memories from a single drop. She'd thought the king's wine would be just wine, processed and bottled, too removed from the source to carry any real imprint. She'd been catastrophically wrong. Theron stopped 3 paces away. Up close, he was even more imposing than distance suggested. Tall enough to block out the chandelier above, broad-shouldered beneath his formal black coat, with a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so carefully empty of emotion. But Mira had tasted his blood. She'd seen past the emptiness. "You tasted it," he said quietly. His voice was deep, controlled, each word precisely placed. It wasn't a question. Mira's mouth was dry. She should deny it, should pretend confusion, should do anything except tell the truth. Instead, she met his eyes and nodded once. Something flickered across his face, too quick to name. Stand. It took 3 attempts, but Mira managed to get her feet under her. She stood, trembling, acutely aware of the wine staining her servant's dress, of the cut on her wrist still bleeding sluggishly, of the hundreds of immortal eyes watching this interaction with ravenous curiosity. Theron stepped closer, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, could count the faint scars on his knuckles from centuries of warfare. He leaned down, his lips near her ear, and spoke in a voice pitched for her alone. "What did you see?" Mira's gift had shown her many things over the years. Merchants' dishonesty, lovers' betrayals, warriors' fears, but she'd never seen anything like the bone-deep loneliness in Theron Nightshade's blood, the weight of 300 years of absolute isolation, the desperate hope he'd buried so thoroughly he'd almost forgotten it existed. The question hung between them, heavy with danger. She could lie. Should lie. But the memory of that little boy trying not to cry, of the young king allowing himself 5 minutes of weakness, of centuries of being seen as a symbol rather than a person, those memories made her brave. Or perhaps foolish. Mira rose on her toes, bringing her lips close to his ear the way he'd done to her, and whispered the secret his blood had revealed, the thing he'd never told anyone, the truth he barely admitted to himself. "You're tired," she breathed, "so tired of being strong. And you're terrified that if you ever stop, even for a moment, everything you've built will crumble. You've been holding up the sky for 300 years, and you're afraid that if anyone knew how heavy it was, they'd see you as weak instead of powerful. You want someone to tell you it's okay to rest. You want permission to be human, even though you haven't been human for centuries." Theron Nightshade went absolutely still. The great hall might as well have been empty for all the attention he paid to their audience. His silver eyes searched Mira's face, looking for mockery, for manipulation, for any sign that she was using this knowledge as a weapon. She met his gaze steadily, letting him see the truth. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't awed by his power. She'd tasted his blood, seen his soul, and she knew him in a way no one else did. And she didn't think less of him for it. Something in his expression cracked. Just a hairline fracture in the perfect mask, but Mira saw it, tasted it in the air between them, in the slight change in his breathing. Then, while the entire court watched in stunned silence, King Theron Nightshade, ruler of the vampire realm, the immortal who had never bowed to anyone in 3 centuries, slowly lowered himself to one knee before her. The court erupted. Not loudly, vampires were too controlled for that, but the shift in energy was palpable. Shocked murmurs rippled through the hall like wind through dead leaves. Mira heard fragments of whispered conversations, felt hundreds of eyes burning into her back, tasted the jealousy and confusion and rage flavoring the air. But her attention remained fixed on the king kneeling before her. Theron's head was bowed, not in submission but in something that looked almost like relief. His hands rested on his bent knee, perfectly still, but Mira noticed the way his fingers trembled slightly, the only visible sign of whatever storm was raging beneath his controlled exterior. "Your Majesty," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Please stand. I didn't mean to. You saw me." His voice was quiet, rough with something Mira couldn't quite name. Not the king. Not the symbol. Me. He raised his head, and his silver eyes were bright, with an emotion that made Mira's chest tighten. "Do you understand how rare that is? How impossible?" Mira didn't know what to say. She was acutely aware of the court watching, of the danger this moment represented, of how quickly wonder could turn to violence in a room full of predators. A woman's voice cut through the whispers, sharp as a blade. "This is unprecedented." Lady Seraphine, the king's chief advisor, stepped forward from the crowd. She was ancient even by vampire standards, her beauty preserved like a flower pressed in glass, and her dark eyes held the kind of calculation that came from surviving 1,000 political battles. "Your Majesty," the girl clearly used some form of manipulation. Blood magic, perhaps, or she used nothing, Theron said, still not standing, still looking at Mira as if she were the only person in the room. "She has a gift. One I've never encountered before." He finally rose, unfolding to his full height with fluid grace, but he didn't step away from Mira. Instead, he held out his hand, palm up, an offering rather than a command. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. It couldn't be, not from a king. But the way he said it, the vulnerability still visible in his eyes, made it feel like one. Mira hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. His skin was cool, exactly as cool as she'd expected vampire flesh to be. But his grip was gentle, careful, as if he were holding something precious and breakable. They walked through the silent court, every step watched, every breath analyzed. Theron led her out of the great hall, through corridors lined with portraits of long-dead kings, past guards who snapped to attention without meeting their sovereign's eyes. He didn't speak until they reached the eastern terrace, a balcony overlooking the palace gardens where moonlight turned everything silver and silent. The night air was cool against Mira's skin, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine and old stone. Below them, the gardens stretched out like a dark maze, paths winding between ancient trees and carefully cultivated shadows. Theron released her hand, but didn't move away. He stood at the balcony's edge, looking out over his kingdom, his profile sharp against the moonlight. For a long moment, he said nothing. "Then, tell me about your gift." Mira wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how thin her servant's dress was, how inappropriate this entire situation had become. "It's called blood tasting," she said quietly. "I've had it since I was a child. When I taste someone's blood, even a drop, I can see their emotions, their memories, the things they hide from everyone else. And you've kept this secret. Not a question." "People fear what they don't understand," Mira replied. "A servant girl who can taste truth in blood? That's dangerous. I learned to hide it, to avoid situations where I might accidentally—" She gestured helplessly. "Taste a vampire king's personal wine?" Theron's lips quirked, not quite a smile, but something close. "That was an accident. I swear it. I know." He turned to face her fully, and the moonlight caught the silver in his eyes, made them glow like captured starlight. I could taste your sincerity in the air when you whispered to me. No deception, no manipulation, just truth. You could taste it? Theron nodded slowly. Vampires have heightened senses. I can taste emotions on the air the way you taste them in blood. Fear, lust, ambition, I smell them all constantly. The court reeks of it, everyone wanting something, everyone hiding their true intentions behind practiced smiles. He paused. You smell of truth. It's unusual. Mira thought about that. About this powerful king surrounded by people who lied with every breath, never able to trust what anyone said, always having to filter words through layers of political maneuvering and hidden agendas. The loneliness of that struck her again, the same bone-deep isolation she'd tasted in his blood. Is that why you kneeled? She asked softly. Because I told you the truth? I kneeled, Theron said, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. Because you gave me something I haven't had in 300 years. Recognition. Not of my power or my position. You recognized my exhaustion. My fear, the parts of me I thought I'd buried so deep no one would ever find them. He took a step closer, and Mira's breath caught. Do you know what it's like to be seen only as a symbol? To have people bow and scrape and obey, but never once look at you as a person? To be so completely alone in a room full of people? No, Mira admitted, but I know what it's like to hide who you really are. To be afraid of what people will do if they see the truth. Something in Theron's expression softened. Your gift. Have you always been alone with it? I had a sister once, Mira said, the words surprising her. She rarely spoke about Lissa. She was blood-touched too, but differently. She could heal by sharing her blood. We were the only two people in our village with blood gifts. The past tense hung heavy between them. What happened to her? Theron asked gently. Fever, 6 years ago. She tried to heal too many people at once, and it drained her until there was nothing left. Mira's throat tightened with the memory. She died believing her gift was worth dying for. That helping people mattered more than her own survival. And you believe she was wrong? Mira met his eyes. I believe she should have been allowed to matter too, not just her gift. Her. Theron was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving Mira every opportunity to pull away. His fingers brushed her cheek, barely a whisper of contact. You matter, he said quietly. Not just your gift, you. The simple words struck something in Mira's chest, made her eyes burn with unexpected tears. She blinked them back, trying to maintain some composure, but Theron had already seen. I've made you cry, he said, sounding genuinely distressed. I didn't know, Mira interrupted. These are good tears, I think. I'm not entirely sure. It's been a strange evening. That pulled a real smile from him, small but genuine. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less like a marble statue, and more like a man who might once have known how to laugh freely. Strange is one word for it, he agreed. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, looking out over the gardens. Mira's mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened. Less than an hour ago, she'd been just another invisible servant. Now she was standing on the king's private terrace, having a conversation that felt more intimate than any she'd had in years. What happens now? She finally asked. Now, Theron said slowly, as if he were figuring it out as he spoke. I ask you a question, and you give me an honest answer. All right. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious but open in a way she suspected few people ever saw. Would you be willing to stay in the palace? Not as a servant, But as he paused, searching for words, as someone I can speak honestly with, someone who sees past the crown, I would compensate you fairly, and you would have your own quarters, your own freedom. You could leave at any time. But he stopped, vulnerability flickering across his face. I find I'm very tired of being alone. Mira stared at him, trying to process the request. The Vampire King, the most powerful being in the realm, was asking her, a servant girl with a dangerous gift, to stay. Not commanding, asking. I don't understand, she said carefully. You have advisors, courtiers, people who've known you for decades, centuries. Why me? Because they see the crown, Theron replied simply. You see me. There's a difference. He moved to the stone railing, gripping it with both hands, as if anchoring himself. Do you know what it's like to carry the weight of a kingdom? Every decision I make affects thousands of lives, every law, every treaty, every judgment. I can never afford to be wrong, to be weak, to be uncertain. The moment I show vulnerability, there are a dozen factions ready to exploit it. So you show nothing, Mira said softly, understanding. I show strength, control, authority. His knuckles whitened against the stone, and I maintain it perfectly, every moment of every day, until I'm alone. Then I remove the crown, and I allow myself exactly 10 minutes to remember what it feels like to be just Theron. Not the king, not the symbol. Just a man who's very, very tired. The confession hung in the night air between them. Mira stepped closer, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the lines around his eyes that spoke of centuries of carefully controlled exhaustion. 10 minutes a day, she murmured. For 300 years. It's enough, Theron said automatically. No, Mira said gently. It isn't. He turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her chest ache. What would you have me do? I am the king. The realm needs you to not collapse from the weight of 3 centuries of isolation, Mira interrupted. She was being far too bold, speaking to royalty this way. But the words were already out. You asked me for honesty. Here it is. You're breaking under the pressure, and you've been breaking so slowly, so carefully, that no one's noticed. Not even you. Theron's jaw tightened. I've maintained my position for 300 years. I haven't broken. Not yet, Mira agreed. But your blood tasted of desperation, of reaching the end of something and not knowing how to keep going. That's why you kneeled when I spoke your truth, because someone finally saw how close you were to shattering. He was silent for a long moment, his silver eyes searching her face. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. Yes, the admission seemed to cost him something. He turned away, shoulders rigid. I shouldn't have told you that. It's a weakness. It's human, Mira corrected, even for someone who hasn't been human for a very long time. And now you know the Vampire King's greatest secret, Theron said, his voice carefully neutral. What will you do with that knowledge? Mira understood what he wasn't saying. She held power over him now, the kind of power that could be weaponized, sold to his enemies, used for personal gain. A smart person would leverage it, would demand compensation, safety, status. Instead, Mira said, I'll keep it, the same way you'll keep mine. He glanced at her sharply. You're blood tasting. Everyone's afraid of blood magic, Mira explained. If word spread that a blood taster was living in the palace, had access to the nobility, could taste their secrets, I'd be lucky if they only exiled me. More likely, I'd disappear quietly one night, and no one would ask questions. Understanding flickered in Theron's eyes. So, we both carry dangerous truths about each other. And we both have reasons to keep them safe, Mira agreed. She held out her hand, palm up, mirroring the gesture he'd made in the Great Hall. An alliance, maybe. Two people who see each other clearly, who understand the weight of secrets. Theron looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he placed his hand in hers. His skin was cool against her warmth, his grip gentle but firm. An alliance, he agreed. Though I suspect it's more than that. What do you mean? I mean, Theron said, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that felt unconscious, natural, that I haven't had a friend in longer than I can remember. I'm not entirely sure how it works anymore. The vulnerability in those words made Mira's chest tight. I think, she said slowly, it starts with honesty, which we seem to have covered. Then, maybe trust? Trust, Theron repeated, as if testing the word. That's difficult for me. For me too, Mira admitted. But I trusted you with my secret. You could have me killed, or imprisoned, or used my gift for your own purposes. Instead, you asked me to stay. I asked you to stay, Theron confirmed, because when you looked at me, when you spoke my deepest truth, you didn't flinch. You didn't recoil or pity me or try to use it against me. You just understood. He paused. That's worth more than gold. More than power. It's worth protecting. Mira felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of fear and loneliness she'd carried since Lissa died. So I can stay? Not as a servant? As my guest, Theron said firmly. And, if you're willing, as my advisor. Your blood-tasting gift, combined with my ability to sense emotions, we could actually know when people are lying, when they're plotting, when they're being honest. He smiled slightly. It would be refreshing to have one conversation that isn't layered in political maneuvering. I've never been anyone's advisor before, Mira warned. I don't know anything about court politics or diplomacy or, you know truth, Theron interrupted. That's rarer and more valuable than any political education. And, he added, his expression softening, you know how to see people instead of positions. That's a gift I desperately need. The weight of what he was offering settled over Mira. Safety. Purpose. Recognition for who she was. Not just what she could do. It was everything she'd wanted since Lissa died. Everything she'd thought she'd never find. There's one condition, she said carefully. Theron raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating with the king? I'm negotiating with Theron, Mara corrected. The man who's tired of being alone. That's different. A real smile crossed his face, transforming his features from stern to almost gentle. All right. What's your condition? You get more than 10 minutes a day, Mira said firmly. To be just Theron. No crown, no expectations, no performance. An hour at least. Every day. Theron started to protest. I can't possibly. An hour, Mira repeated. Or I walk away right now. Because I won't watch someone slowly kill themselves with isolation and duty. I did that with Lissa, watched her burn herself out for others. I won't do it again. The reference to her sister made Theron pause. An hour, he said slowly, might actually be impossible. The demands on my time are important, Mira agreed, but so are you. The person, not just the position. If you truly want me to stay, if you truly want someone who sees past the crown, then you have to let yourself be seen. Regularly. Not in stolen minutes between obligations. They stood in silence, Mira's challenge hanging between them. She half expected him to refuse, to remind her that he was the king and she was nobody. Instead, Theron squeezed her hand gently, his expression thoughtful. You drive a hard bargain, he said finally. But you're right. An hour a day, starting now, I suppose, since I've already abandoned my own banquet. The first week was an adjustment neither of them had fully anticipated. Mira was moved from the cramped servants' quarters to a suite of rooms in the eastern wing, close enough to the king's private chambers to be convenient, but far enough to maintain propriety. The rooms were larger than her entire family's house had been, with windows overlooking the gardens and furniture that looked too expensive to actually sit on. She sat on it anyway. Learning to navigate the palace as something other than invisible staff proved challenging. Servants who'd once ignored her now watched with suspicious eyes. Nobles who'd never noticed her existence suddenly appeared in her path, all polite smiles and carefully casual questions. What was her relationship with the king? What did they discuss? Was it true she had magical abilities? Mira deflected as best she could, but she understood the subtext. They saw her as a threat, an unknown variable that had appeared from nowhere and somehow earned the king's attention. Lady Seraphine was the most direct. She appeared at Mira's door on the third morning, perfectly coiffed despite the early hour, her dark eyes assessing everything from Mira's borrowed dress to the books Theron had sent to her room. "May I come in?" Seraphine asked, though she was already crossing the threshold. "Of course, my lady," Mira said, trying to remember the formal protocols she'd been hastily taught. Seraphine settled into a chair with the grace of someone who'd perfected the movement over centuries. "I want to understand what you are to the king." "His friend," Mira said, simply. "I see." Seraphine's tone suggested she saw something quite different. The king doesn't have friends. He has allies, advisors, subjects. But friends? That's a luxury he can't afford. Maybe that's the problem, Mira replied before she could stop herself. Seraphine's eyebrow arched. "You think 300 years of successfully maintaining his throne is a problem?" "I think 300 years of complete isolation might be," Mira said carefully. "Strength doesn't mean never needing anyone. Sometimes it means knowing when to accept help, and you believe you can help him." It wasn't quite a question, not quite a challenge, but something in between. "I believe he deserves to have someone who doesn't want anything from him except his company," Mira said. "No political agenda, no maneuvering for position, just friendship." Seraphine studied her for a long moment. "You're either remarkably naive or remarkably brave. I haven't decided which. Can't I be both?" That pulled a small smile from the ancient vampire. "Perhaps. But understand this, girl. The king's isolation isn't accidental. It's protective. He trusts no one, because betrayal is inevitable in our world. If you hurt him, if you prove to be another disappointment, I will personally ensure you regret it." The threat was delivered calmly, almost pleasantly, which made it more terrifying. "I have no intention of hurting him," Mira said, meeting Seraphine's gaze steadily. "Good." Seraphine rose, smoothing her skirts. "Then we'll get along fine. He needs someone, though he'd never admit it. Just don't make me regret allowing this." After she left, Mira sat in her too expensive chair and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. That evening, during their agreed-upon hour, she told Theron about the conversation. They'd fallen into a routine of meeting in his private study, a room filled with books and maps and the comfortable clutter of actual use rather than display. Theron was reviewing correspondence when she arrived, but he immediately set it aside. "Seraphine threatened you," he said. "Not quite a question." "In the nicest possible way," Mira agreed, settling into the chair across from his desk. "She's protective. I've known her for 2.5 centuries. She's saved my life at least a dozen times." "She's terrifying," Mira said frankly. "That too." Theron smiled slightly. "But she's right to be cautious. You appeared from nowhere, and suddenly I'm changing centuries of habit. It looks suspicious." "Is that what this is?" Mira asked. "Changing habit?" Theron set down the letter he'd been holding and gave her his full attention. "When I made my daily schedule 300 years ago, I built in no time for personal connection. No meals shared for pleasure, no conversations without purpose, no moments that didn't serve the kingdom. He gestured around the study. This room was for work. Only work. Now it's where I come to not be the king for an hour. And how does that feel? Mira asked softly. Terrifying, he admitted. Also necessary. I didn't realize how much I needed it until I had it. He paused. Thank you for insisting on it. You don't have to thank me for basic human decency, Mira said. Perhaps not. But I do anyway. He leaned back in his chair, looking more relaxed than she'd yet seen him. Tell me about your day. And please, make it interesting. I've spent the last 6 hours listening to Lord Castellan argue about trade routes. Mira laughed and began describing her morning navigation of palace politics. She discovered that the kitchens were the best source of honest information, that the head gardener was happy to teach her about night-blooming plants, that the library held books she'd only dreamed of reading. Theron listened with genuine interest, asking questions, offering observations, occasionally laughing at her descriptions of noble absurdity. They talked about everything and nothing. Books they'd read, places they'd traveled or wanted to travel, the peculiarities of palace life. Mira found herself telling him about growing up in a small village, about Lissa's endless optimism, about the day she'd first discovered her blood-tasting gift by accidentally tasting a friend's scraped knee. I was 6, she said, smiling at the memory. I thought I was dying because suddenly I could taste Emma's fear and pain and confusion all at once. Lissa found me crying in the garden and explained what I was, what we both were. She made it feel like a gift instead of a curse. She sounds remarkable, Theron said gently. She was. Mira's throat tightened. She believed our gifts existed to help people, that we were lucky to be different because it meant we could make a difference. And you? Theron asked, Do you believe that? Mira considered the question. I think I believed it more when she was alive. After she died, I mostly wanted to hide. Being different felt dangerous instead of special. But lately, she met his eyes. Lately, I'm remembering that she might have been right, just not in the way she thought. What do you mean? She thought her gift had to be used in big, obvious ways, healing dozens of people at once, even if it killed her. But maybe gifts are meant for smaller things too. Connection. Understanding. Helping one person feel less alone. Theron was quiet for a moment. I think your sister would be proud of you. The simple words made Mira's eyes burn. I hope so. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Theron said, I want to show you something. He led her to a door at the back of his study, one she'd assumed was a closet. Instead, it opened onto a small balcony, barely large enough for 2 people, completely hidden from view by the angle of the palace walls. My secret place, he explained. When the throne room feels too confining, when I can't take one more political maneuvering, I come here. The balcony overlooked a quiet corner of the gardens, where ancient trees created deep shadows and moonlight filtered through leaves in dappled patterns. It was peaceful, private, worlds away from the grand halls and watched spaces of the rest of the palace. It's beautiful, Myra breathed, stepping onto the small balcony. The night air carried the scent of jasmine and earth, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear water trickling over stone. Theron joined her, standing close in the confined space. I found this spot about a century ago. The architecture shifted during renovations, and this little pocket of space was created by accident. As far as I know, I'm the only person who uses it. And you're sharing it with me, Mira said softly. I'm sharing it with you, Theron confirmed. He leaned against the railing, and in the moonlight, with his formal crown left in his study and his expression unguarded, he looked younger, less like an immortal king, and more like someone who'd simply lived a very long time. Can I ask you something? Mira ventured. Always. When did you last let yourself be truly vulnerable with someone? Theron considered the question. My wife, he said finally. 350 years ago, before I became king, before the weight of the crown, when I was just a nobleman who'd fallen in love with a human woman who saw me as Theron, not as a vampire or a political asset. The past tense wasn't lost on Mira. What happened? She grew old, Theron said simply. I didn't. We had 40 beautiful years together, and then I watched her age while I remained frozen. She died in my arms, gray-haired and wrinkled, and still the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And I promised myself I would never do that again, would never let myself care for someone I'd inevitably lose. So you chose to be alone, Mira said. I chose duty, Theron corrected. The kingdom needed a strong king, someone who wouldn't be compromised by personal attachments or weakened by grief. I gave them that. I became that. And somewhere along the way, I forgot there was any other option. Until 3 drops of wine, Mira said. Theron smiled slightly. Until 3 drops of wine and a servant girl who saw past everything I'd built to hide behind. He turned to face her fully. You asked me once what happens now. I've been thinking about that question, and I think perhaps what happens is that I try to remember how to be more than just a king. With your help, if you're willing. I'm willing, Mira said immediately. But I need you to understand something. I'm not your wife. I'm not going to grow old gracefully and give you 40 years before leaving you alone again. I know, Theron said quietly. Then why? Mira asked. Why risk caring again? Why open yourself up to more loss? Theron was silent for a long moment, looking out over the gardens. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but certain, because the alternative is dying by inches, becoming so isolated that I forget what it means to be alive at all. I've been doing that for 3 centuries, Mira. Existing, but not living. And your blood-tasting gift showed me something I've been trying to ignore, that I'm reaching the end of what I can sustain alone. He met her eyes. So yes, you'll grow old. Yes, I'll lose you eventually. But I think 40 years of truly living might be worth the pain that comes after. At least, I'd like the chance to find out. Mira's chest felt tight. That's a lot of pressure to put on one friendship. Then we'll take it slowly, Theron said. 1 day at a time. 1 hour at a time. No expectations beyond honesty and presence. I can do that, Mira agreed. They stood together on the hidden balcony, and Mira found herself thinking about the strange path that had led her here. A clumsy accident, 3 drops of wine, a whispered truth. Such small things to change the course of 2 lives. Over the next few weeks, they settled into their new dynamic. Theron introduced Mira to his council, not as his advisor, but as someone whose insights he valued. The council members were skeptical at first, but Mira's gift proved useful. She could taste when nobles were lying about crop yields, when traders were inflating their losses, when advisors were serving their own interests instead of the kingdom's. She never revealed her gift openly, simply positioned herself near enough to observe, to taste the air when blood was drawn for formal contracts, to whisper her findings to Theron privately. He, in turn, taught her to read the subtle politics of the court. Who held real power versus ceremonial positions, which alliances were stable, and which were maintained through fear. How to navigate conversations laden with double meanings. Lord Castellan is asking about grain distribution, Theron explained one evening during their hour, but he's really asking if I noticed his daughter trying to catch my attention at the last banquet. Did you? Mira asked, amused. I notice everything, Theron said dryly. I'm 300 years old. I've perfected the art of peripheral awareness. But I've also perfected the art of pretending I haven't noticed, which is sometimes more useful. Mira laughed. The complexities of being royal. Endless, Theron agreed. Though it's easier with you here. Having someone I can speak plainly with, who doesn't require layers of diplomatic phrasing. It's like being able to breathe deeply after centuries of shallow breaths. He paused. That's not too dramatic, is it? It's honest, Mira said. And that's what matters. They were in his study again, the hidden balcony door open to let in night air. Mira had brought tea, real human tea that she'd convinced the kitchens to stock, and Theron had discovered he enjoyed the ritual of it, even if he didn't need the warmth. I had a thought, Mira said, setting down her cup. About your council meetings. They're all vampires, correct? Yes. It's tradition. The Vampire King has a vampire council. But half your subjects are human, Mira pointed out. Shouldn't they have representation? Someone who understands their needs and concerns? Theron tilted his head, considering. That would be revolutionary. The council hasn't changed in structure for 500 years. Maybe it should, Mira suggested. I'm not saying replace anyone, but perhaps add positions? A human advisor for agricultural issues, another for trade. It would show your human subjects that you value their perspective. It would also infuriate half my current council, Theron said, but he was smiling. Seraphine would probably have an apoplexy. But you're considering it. I'm considering it, he admitted. You're dangerous, you know. You make me want to change things I've accepted for centuries. Good, Mira said firmly. Change isn't always bad. Sometimes it's necessary. Spoken like someone who's only lived 22 years. Theron teased gently. Spoken like someone who hasn't spent 300 years stuck in the same patterns. Mira countered. Theron laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his features. Touch. A knock at the door interrupted them. Theron's expression shifted immediately, the relaxed openness replaced by formal control. Enter. A guard stepped in, bowing deeply. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. There's been an incident in the Eastern Quarter. A dispute between human merchants and vampire nobles that's escalated to violence. Your presence is requested. Theron rose immediately, his entire bearing changing. This was the king, the ruler who carried the weight of the realm. Inform the captain I'll be there shortly. Assemble the relevant council members. The guard bowed again and left. Theron turned to Mira, apology in his eyes. Duty calls. I understand, Mira said, standing. Go. Your kingdom needs you. He paused at the door, looking back. This is my life. Interrupted plans, emergencies at all hours. Constantly being pulled in different directions. If you stay, if this friendship continues, there will be many nights like this. I know, Mira said gently. And I'll be here when you get back. Whenever that is. Theron returned near dawn, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical weariness. Mira was still awake, reading in his study, and she looked up when he entered. How bad? She asked quietly. 3 dead. 2 human merchants and 1 vampire noble, Theron said, sinking into his chair. The dispute was over trade rights, but the violence was about centuries of mistrust and resentment. I spent 4 hours negotiating a peace that will probably last a week before someone finds a new reason to hate each other. Mira set down her book and moved to sit across from him. Tell me what happened. So he did. He explained how the merchants had been selling grain at what the noble considered inflated prices, how the noble had tried to seize the grain by force, how weapons had been drawn, and lives lost before anyone thought to summon the king. He described the grief on both sides, the anger, the fear that this would escalate into something worse. I issued judgments, Theron said tiredly. Compensations, restrictions, new trade guidelines. Fair judgments, I think. But fairness doesn't bring back the dead or heal the hate. No, Mira agreed. It doesn't. The worst part, Theron continued, his voice rough, was seeing how easily it happened, how quickly fear turns to violence, how thin the peace I've maintained really is. 300 years of treaties and laws, and it all nearly collapsed over a grain dispute. Mira reached across the desk and took his hand. The gesture was bold, probably inappropriate, but she didn't care. He looked like he needed the contact, the reminder that he wasn't alone in this. Theron's fingers tightened around hers. "Thank you for staying. Where else would I be?" Mira said simply. They sat like that for a while, hands linked across the desk, until some of the tension eased from Theron's shoulders. Then he said, "Your idea. About human representatives on the council. After tonight, I think it's not just good, it's necessary. You're going to do it?" "I'm going to try," Theron said. "Seraphine will argue, and half the council will probably threaten to resign. But you're right. If I want lasting peace, I need to actually hear all my subjects, not just the immortal ones." "That's brave," Mira said. "That's terrifying," Theron corrected, "but necessary. You have a gift for seeing what I'm too close to notice." "We balance each other," Mira said. "You have centuries of experience and knowledge. I have fresh eyes and no investment in how things have always been done." "A good team," Theron agreed. Then, more quietly, "I'm glad you're here, Mira. Even on nights like this. Especially on nights like this." Over the following weeks, Theron began implementing changes. He announced the creation of human advisory positions on the council, appointed representatives from different regions, and personally oversaw the integration. The vampire nobles were outraged, just as predicted. Seraphine argued for hours about tradition and precedent. Lord Castellan claimed it would undermine vampire authority. Others muttered about human influence corrupting the pure vampire court. Theron listened to all of it with his characteristic patience, then calmly explained that the realm included both vampires and humans, and wisdom could be found in both. If they wanted lasting peace, they needed lasting understanding. The first council meeting with the new human representatives was tense. Mira attended at Theron's request, sitting quietly in the corner, observing. She watched as the vampire nobles barely concealed their contempt, as the human representatives nervously presented their concerns, as Theron navigated the hostility with careful diplomacy. But then something shifted. One of the human representatives, an older woman named Helena, who managed the southern agricultural regions, made a suggestion about crop rotation that would benefit both human farmers and vampire blood wine production. A vampire council member, Lord Artemis, actually listened. "That's not entirely foolish," he admitted grudgingly. "We've had issues with the blood wine grapes becoming less potent. Your rotation method might address that." Helena smiled. "We could trial it in the southern vineyards. If it works, expand from there." It was a small moment, barely noticeable, but Mira caught it. The first crack in the wall of mistrust, the first genuine collaboration. She glanced at Theron and found him already looking at her, the smallest smile on his lips. Progress. That evening, during their hour, Theron was almost jubilant. "Did you see? Lord Artemis and Helena were actually agreeing by the end." "Agreeing." "I saw," Mira said, smiling at his enthusiasm. "You were right about this change." "We were right," Theron corrected. "You had the idea. I'm just implementing it." "Still," Mira said, "watching you lead today, seeing how you handled the tension and guided them toward cooperation, that was impressive. You're a good king, Theron." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I've been king for 300 years, but I don't think anyone's ever said that to me quite that way before." "What way?" "Like you mean it," he said simply. "Not like you're trying to flatter me or gain favor. Just honest observation." "It is honest," Mira assured him. You care about your people, all of them. You're willing to change centuries of tradition because it's the right thing to do. That's not just good kingship, that's good character. Theron was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I need to tell you something. Something in his tone made Mira's chest tighten. All right. When I asked you to stay, when I told you I needed someone who saw past the crown, I was honest about that. But I wasn't entirely honest about why it mattered so much. He stood, moving to the window, his back to her. For 300 years, I've been alone. Completely, devastatingly alone. I told myself it was necessary, that it made me stronger, that the kingdom needed an uncompromised king, and maybe that was true. But it was also killing me, slowly, day by day. He turned to face her. You asked me once when I'd last been vulnerable with someone. I said it was my wife, 350 years ago. What I didn't say was that after she died, I promised myself I'd never be that vulnerable again, that I'd never need anyone that much again. But, Mira prompted gently, but your blood-tasting gift showed me something I've been denying. I'm not strong because I'm alone. I'm breaking because I'm alone. The weight of the crown, of the kingdom, of 3 centuries of complete isolation, it's crushing me. And if I don't change, if I don't let someone in, I will shatter. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. So you let me in, Mira said. I let you in, Theron agreed. Not just as a friend, though you are that, but as someone who reminds me that I'm more than just my position, someone who sees Theron, not just the king. And I need you to know how much that means to me. Mira stood, crossing to where he stood by the window. I see you, she said quietly. All of you. The king who makes difficult decisions and carries impossible weight. The man who's tired and lonely and trying so hard to do right by everyone. The person who deserves kindness and rest and connection. Theron's eyes were bright in the lamplight. Thank you. The changes Theron implemented rippled through the palace, like stones thrown into still water. Human representatives brought fresh perspectives to old problems. Agricultural yields improved. Trade disputes decreased. Small collaborations between vampire nobles and human advisors began to form, tentative but genuine. But not everyone was pleased. Opposition formed quickly, centered around a faction of older vampires who saw the changes as a dilution of vampire authority. They were careful, never openly challenging the king, but Mira could taste their resentment in the air, sharp and acidic like spoiled wine. Lord Castellan is planning something, she told Theron one evening. I could taste his satisfaction today when the council was discussing the new trade routes. He shouldn't be satisfied. Those routes cut into his personal profits. Theron frowned, setting aside the document he'd been reviewing. You're certain? I tasted his blood last week when he cut his hand during a formal signing, Mira explained. His intentions were clear. He wants to undermine the human representatives, make them look incompetent or dangerous, force you to remove them. How? I don't know yet, but he's patient. He'll wait for the right opportunity. Theron was quiet for a moment, thinking. We need to be careful. Castellan has allies, powerful ones. If he moves against us, it won't be direct. Then we watch, Mira said. And we prepare. But preparation wasn't enough. 2 weeks later, a shipment of grain destined for the human territories was found contaminated with a substance that would have sickened thousands. The human representative who'd approved the shipment, a young man named Marcus, was immediately accused of negligence, or worse. He's being set up, Mira told Theron urgently. They were in his study, reviewing the evidence. Marcus is careful, meticulous. He would never approve a contaminated shipment. Can you prove it? Theron asked. Not without revealing my gift, Mira admitted. But I tasted his blood when we shook hands last week. He has no malice, no intention to harm. Someone else contaminated that grain after he approved it. Castellan? Probably, or someone working for him. Theron's expression was grim. If we accuse Castellan without proof, it will look like we're protecting the human representatives at all costs, undermining our own nobles. But if we don't defend Marcus, the entire human council will lose credibility. So we need proof, Mira said. Actual, physical proof that someone tampered with the grain after Marcus approved it. They worked through the night, reviewing shipping manifests, interviewing guards, following the grain's path from approval to discovery. Theron used his authority to access records that would normally be private, while Mira used her gift to taste truth in the blood of everyone involved. Finally, near dawn, they found it. A guard who'd been paid to look away while someone accessed the grain storage, a vampire servant who'd added the contaminant under orders, and a paper trail, carefully hidden but not quite hidden enough, that led back to Castellan's estate. We have him, Theron said quietly, staring at the evidence spread across his desk. We do, Mira agreed. But exposing him will cause a rift in the court. His faction will rally around him, claim he's being persecuted for defending vampire interests. Then let them rally, Theron said, his voice hard. I will not let an innocent man be destroyed to maintain false peace. Castellan attempted to poison thousands of humans and frame a council member. That's not defending vampire interests. That's attempted murder. The trial was swift and public. Theron presented the evidence methodically, giving Castellan every opportunity to defend himself. The older vampire tried, claiming the evidence was fabricated, that the guard and servant were lying, that this was a conspiracy to eliminate vampire voices from the court. But the proof was overwhelming. Blood contracts signed by Castellan authorizing payment to the guard. Chemical receipts traced to his estate. Testimony from multiple witnesses. In the end, the council had no choice but to find him guilty. Castellan's punishment was severe. Exile from the court, loss of title and lands, public disgrace. As guards led him away, he looked at Theron with undisguised hatred. You've chosen them over your own kind, he spat. History will remember you as the king who weakened the vampire realm. History, Theron said calmly, will remember me as the king who chose justice over prejudice. Guards, remove him. The aftermath was complex. Castellan's faction fractured, some members quietly withdrawing their opposition, others doubling down on their resistance to change. But something else happened too. The human representatives, who'd been tentative and uncertain, became bold. They spoke up more in council meetings, offered ideas with confidence, began to truly collaborate with the vampire nobles who were willing to listen. And Marcus, the young man who'd been falsely accused, became one of Theron's most loyal supporters. You saved my life, he told the king during a private audience, and my reputation. I won't forget that. Thank you for your service, Theron replied, and for being brave enough to take a position that clearly comes with risks. That evening, Mira found Theron on his hidden balcony, staring out at the gardens. She joined him silently, and for a while they just stood together. You did the right thing, she finally said. I know, Theron replied, but it cost me. Castellan's allies may never fully trust me again. I've created divisions that might take decades to heal. Or you've drawn a line, Mira offered. Showed everyone what you stand for. Justice, fairness, protection of all your subjects, that's not a cost, that's a statement. Theron turned to look at her. How do you do that? Do what? Find the hope in difficult situations. See the positive when I'm focused on the problems. Mira smiled. Someone once told me that strength comes in many forms. Maybe optimism is one of them. Your sister? My sister, Mira confirmed. She believed that even small acts of kindness could change the world. I'm starting to think she was right. Theron reached out and took her hand, the gesture familiar now after weeks of friendship. Thank you for staying, he said quietly. Thank you for being worth staying for, Mira replied. They stood together on the balcony, hands linked, and Mira realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about her helping a lonely king anymore. It was about two people who'd found understanding in each other, who'd built something genuine in a place where authenticity was rare. She'd come to the palace as a servant, trying to survive. Now she was here as herself, fully seen and valued for who she was. And Theron, who'd spent 300 years maintaining perfect control, was learning to be vulnerable again, to trust again, to hope again. It wasn't a romance, not in the traditional sense, but it was love of a kind, the deep platonic intimacy that comes from truly seeing and being seen by another person. I have an idea, Theron said suddenly. Another revolutionary change? Mira teased. Perhaps. I want to create a festival. A celebration that honors both vampire and human traditions, brings the entire realm together in a way we've never done before. Mira's eyes lit up. That's brilliant. Show unity through celebration rather than just decree. Exactly. And I want you to help plan it. You understand both perspectives, can bridge the gaps I might miss. I'd be honored, Mira said. And so they began planning. Two people working together to change a kingdom, one small step at a time. The Unity Festival, as they named it, took 3 months to plan. Mira worked with both human and vampire organizers, blending traditions, negotiating compromises, creating something entirely new from two distinct cultures. There would be food from human harvests and blood wine from vampire vineyards, music that combined human instruments with vampire vocal harmonies, dances that mixed both styles, and at the center of it all, a ceremony where the king would publicly reaffirm his commitment to all his subjects, regardless of species. As the festival approached, Mira noticed changes in Theron beyond the political. He smiled more easily now, laughed at her jokes, occasionally made his own. The severe king she'd first encountered was still there when duty called, but increasingly, she saw glimpses of the man underneath. The one who'd loved his human wife centuries ago, who'd once known how to be simply Theron. I've been thinking, he said one evening during their hour. They were in his study as usual, but he'd dismissed all potential interruptions, made it clear this time was sacred. That's dangerous, Mira teased. Theron smiled. I've been thinking about what you said when we first met, that I needed more than 10 minutes a day to be just myself. And you've been managing an hour, Mira said. Mostly. Mostly, he agreed. But I want more than that. I want to remember how to be Theron in other contexts too. Not just in this room with you, but in my daily life, with my council, with my subjects. That's good, Mira said encouragingly. But I'm not sure how. I've been performing the role of king for so long that I'm not sure where the performance ends and the real person begins. Mira considered this. Maybe they're not as separate as you think. Maybe being a good king and being yourself aren't mutually exclusive. Explain, Theron said, leaning forward. You're kind, thoughtful, just. Those aren't qualities you're performing. They're who you are. The performance is the emotional distance, the perfect control, the isolation. But the core of what makes you a good king That's authentically you. Theron was quiet, processing this. So I don't need to stop being king to be myself. You need to stop hiding yourself while being king, Mira clarified. Let people see that you care, that decisions weigh on you, that you're not just an untouchable symbol. You can be both powerful and human. Well, human-like. That's terrifying, Theron admitted. But also liberating, Mira suggested. But also liberating, he agreed. He stood, pacing to the window. The festival. I want to do something during the ceremony, something that shows this change, this commitment to being more than just a distant ruler. What did you have in mind? I want to remove my crown, Theron said, publicly. During the Unity Blessing. I want to stand before my people not as a symbol, but as a person who serves them. I want them to see Theron, not just the king. Mira's breath caught. That's unprecedented. The crown is the symbol of your authority. Exactly. And I'm not giving up my authority. I'm showing that authority comes from who I am, not from a piece of metal on my head. He turned to face her. What do you think? I think it's brave, Mira said honestly, and risky. Some people will see it as weakness, and others will see it as strength, Theron countered. The strength to be vulnerable, to trust my people enough to show them the person behind the crown. Then you should do it, Mira said. The festival arrived on the first day of spring, when the gardens bloomed and the air held the promise of new beginnings. Thousands gathered in the palace grounds, humans and vampires mingling in a way that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Mira watched from a balcony as people celebrated together, tasted the joy and hope in the air. But she also tasted the underlying tension, the old prejudices not quite forgotten, the fragile nature of this new peace. Theron found her there, dressed in his formal regalia, crown firmly in place. Ready? She asked. Terrified, he admitted. But yes. They walked together to the grand platform where the ceremony would take place. The crowd fell silent as Theron approached, thousands of eyes fixed on their king. Mira stayed at the edge of the platform, close enough to support, but far enough to not intrude. Theron began to speak, his voice carrying across the grounds. He talked about unity, about the strength found in diversity, about building a kingdom where all people were valued and heard. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached up and removed his crown. The crowd gasped. Mira could taste their shock, their confusion, their fear. But Theron kept speaking, holding the crown in his hands. This crown represents the authority of the vampire throne, he said. But I want you to know that my commitment to you, all of you, comes not from this symbol, but from here. He placed his hand over his heart. I am your king. But I am also Theron Nightshade. A person who makes mistakes, who learns, who cares deeply about your welfare. I ask that you judge me, not by my crown, but by my actions. Not by my title, but by my character. He set the crown down on the platform and stepped forward, standing before his people as just a man. I pledge to serve you, to listen to you, to build a kingdom where every voice matters, not because I am commanded to by duty, but because I choose to out of love for this realm and its people. The silence stretched. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone began to clap, slowly, tentatively at first, then building. More people joined, humans and vampires alike, until the entire grounds thundered with applause. Mira felt tears prick her eyes. He'd done it. He'd shown vulnerability, and been met not with contempt, but with respect. Later, after the ceremony, after hours of celebration, Mira found Theron alone in the gardens. He was still wearing his formal attire minus the crown, and he looked exhausted but peaceful. "You changed everything today," she said softly. "We changed everything," Theron corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you, Mira, without you showing me that being seen didn't mean being weak. That vulnerability could be strength." "I just reminded you of what was already there," Mira said. "You did the hard part." Theron reached for her hand, and she gave it willingly. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to be completely honest. Always. Are you happy here?" he asked. "In the palace, with this life, with our friendship. Are you truly happy, or have you stayed out of obligation?" Mira met his eyes, those silver depths that had seemed so cold when she first saw them, but now held such warmth. "I'm happy," she said truthfully. "Happier than I've been since Lissa died. You've given me purpose, connection, a place where I can be myself without hiding. That's worth more than anything." Theron's expression softened with relief and something good. "Because I've realized something over these months. When I asked you to stay, I thought I needed someone to help me remember how to be human. But what I actually needed was someone who would accept me as I am. Crown or no crown, king or just Theron." He paused, searching for words. "You've become essential to me. Not just as an advisor or a friend, but as the person who reminds me why all of this matters. The kingdom, the changes, the struggles. They matter because we're building something better. Together." Mira felt her chest tighten with emotion. "You've become essential to me too. You gave me a home when I was just surviving. You valued my gift instead of fearing it. You showed me that being different could be powerful instead of dangerous." They stood in the garden, hands linked, and Mira understood that this was what Lissa had meant about gifts being meant to help people, not in grand, self-sacrificing ways, but in small, sustainable ones. Connection. Understanding. Being present for someone who needed to be seen. "I have something for you," Theron said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. "It's not what you think," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "Not a romantic gesture. Something different." He opened the box to reveal a pendant, a circle of silver with intricate engravings. "This is the Nightshade family crest. For 300 years I've been the only one who wore it, the last of my bloodline. But I'd like you to have it. Not as a romantic token, but as a symbol that your family, the family I chose, the person I trust with my true self." Mira's eyes filled with tears. "Theron, I can't, you can," he said gently. "Please. Let me give you this. Let me make official what's already true. You're not just my friend or advisor. You're the sister of my heart, the person who sees me and loves me anyway. That deserves recognition." He placed the pendant around her neck, his fingers gentle as he fastened the clasp. The silver was cool against her skin, and when Mira looked down, she saw the intricate design. A night-blooming flower, surrounded by protective thorns, beautiful and dangerous at once. "It's perfect," she whispered. "You're perfect," Theron replied. "For this role, for this life, for me. And I want you to know that whatever comes, however long we have together, you'll always have a place here. A home. A family." They embraced, and Mira realized this was what she'd been searching for since Lissa died. Not romance or grand destiny, but simple belonging. The knowledge that someone saw her completely and chose her anyway. The months that followed were among the happiest of Mira's life. The Unity Festival became an annual tradition. The human representatives gained confidence and respect. The kingdom slowly transformed from a place of suspicion and division to one of cautious cooperation. And through it all, Mira and Theron maintained their evening hours, their sacred time when he was just Theron, and she was just Mira, two people who understood each other completely. They talked about everything: philosophy, history, silly observations about palace life, deep fears and hopes. They developed inside jokes, argued playfully about books, sat in comfortable silence when words weren't needed. Seraphine watched their friendship with approval, her initial suspicion replaced by genuine warmth. "You've done what I couldn't," she told Mira one day. "You've given him back his humanity. Thank you." Years passed. Mira aged, as humans do, while Theron remained unchanged. She watched silver threads appear in her hair, felt her body grow less quick and more tired. But Theron never looked at her with pity or regret. He simply adjusted, offering his arm when stairs became difficult, reading aloud when her eyes grew tired, treasuring each moment they had. When Mira turned 40, 20 years after that first accidental taste of his blood, Theron threw a celebration that rivaled the Unity Festival. He made a speech about the woman who'd changed his kingdom, who'd reminded him how to be human, who'd chosen to stay when she could have left. "She is my greatest advisor," he told the assembled court, "my truest friend, the sister I chose, and I am grateful for every day she shared with me." Mira stood beside him, wearing the nightshade pendant she'd never taken off, and felt completely, perfectly seen. This was the fairy tale Lissa had believed in, not the romantic kind, but the one about being valued for who you truly are, about finding family in unexpected places, about small acts of kindness, creating profound change. As the celebration continued, Mira and Theron slipped away to their hidden balcony. It had become their special place, where they went when the world became too much, or when they wanted to savor the quiet. 20 years, Theron said softly. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know," Mira agreed. "And we'll have more." "I'm not done yet." Theron smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I know, but someday I'll grow old and die," Mira said bluntly. "And you'll mourn me, and it will hurt terribly. But Theron, these 20 years, this friendship, this life we've built, it's worth that pain. Don't you think?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then yes. 1,000 times yes. "I'd rather have 40 years with you and face the grief than have 300 years of safe isolation." "Good," Mira said. "Then let's not waste our time worrying about the end. Let's focus on now." And they did. They continued their evening hours, their collaborations, their friendship that had transformed a kingdom. They made memories and built traditions, and created a legacy that would outlast both of them. Because that's what Mira had learned from Lissa's death. Gifts weren't meant for grand sacrifices. They were meant for daily choices, small kindnesses, consistent presence, being seen and seeing others in return. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.